Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. He left the city to escape the noise, built a sanctuary by a quiet lake. But when a ruthless HOA, led by a power-hungry woman with a hidden agenda, tries to take what's his, one man must fight back alone. No backup. Welcome to the Lake War. I've never been much of a people person. That's not to say I hate humanity, just that I value silence more than small talk, and I trust trees more than neighbors. That's why, 7 years ago, I walked away from a 30-year career in architecture, sold my condo in Minneapolis, and bought a quiet piece of land nestled by a glassy lake in northern Minnesota. It was just me, the loons, and the occasional deer that wandered too close to the hot tub. Perfection. I built everything myself. 3 small cabins, clean, functional, stylish, and spaced out enough so guests didn't feel like they were on top of each other. Then came the patios, 2 big ones with fire pits and natural stone paving, a cedarwood gazebo, and a pair of jacuzzis overlooking the water. I even rigged up solar lighting, a self-service grill zone, and an outdoor fridge stocked with cold drinks for my guests. It wasn't just a retreat, it was a goddamn lakeside sanctuary. In the summer, I'd rent the cabins to couples or families looking for a weekend away. Fishing was a big draw. I stocked the lake myself. Bass, walleye, northern pike. Nothing too exotic, but enough to give the dad something to brag about and keep the kids entertained. A few of the more upscale clients even booked weekday yoga sessions or wine tastings out on the patio. Life was good. Then, about a year ago, just across the tree line to the west, a new housing development started going up, fast. Cookie-cutter townhomes with names like The Pines at Lakeview and Harbor Villas. A few dozen houses at first, then 50, then 80. I watched it grow like a tumor on the horizon, inching closer to my little corner of the world. And with those homes came a homeowners association. Of course, Lakeview Commons, HOA. 3 words I've since come to associate with migraines and restraining orders. It started innocently enough. I got a knock on the door one Thursday morning. Standing there was a woman in her 40s, polished, confident, with that stiff, glossy helmet of blonde hair that only comes from too much hairspray and too little joy. She introduced herself as Karen Winslow, newly elected president of the HOA, and she asked, very politely, I'll give her that, if the residents of Lakeview Commons could access my patio area during the week. Just the weekdays, she said, for quiet enjoyment by local families. Nothing commercial. We just don't have the same kind of lakefront access as you, and it seems a shame to waste all that lovely space. I should have said no right then. But the HOA wasn't even a year old. The neighbors hadn't caused any trouble yet, and I figured it wouldn't kill me to share my little slice of heaven, as long as they respected it. I laid out some basic ground rules. Weekdays only, no access on weekends or holidays, no fishing without a permit, leave the place clean, and absolutely no harassment of my paying guests. Karen smiled, nodded, even shook my hand like we were sealing some old-fashioned gentleman's agreement. I didn't put it in writing. That was my first mistake. The first few weeks, it went okay. A few moms with kids showed up, read books under the gazebo, dipped their toes in the lake. Some seniors brought lawn chairs and sipped iced tea by the water. I admit, it felt kinda nice seeing the space used. A few of them even thanked me. But then came the coolers, the Bluetooth speakers, the inflatable flamingos, teenagers in wet sneakers tracking mud into my patio. Someone took a dump in the bushes behind the grill zone. Trash started showing up in the recycling bin, stuff I didn't sell or provide. One of my guests, a guy from Chicago who paid good money to unplug, asked if the HOA folks were part of the package deal. He wasn't smiling when he said it. I posted a polite notice on the entrance gate. Private property, HOA access limited to weekdays. Please respect the rules. I figured that would be enough. It wasn't. They started showing up on Saturdays, then Sundays. People I'd never seen before, claiming to be friends of residents. One group brought fishing poles and started casting off my dock like they owned the place. Another group took over the gazebo for a birthday party. I came down with a cup of coffee and nearly walked into a pack of 10-year-olds playing tag across the garden beds. Nobody asked, nobody thanked, nobody cleaned up. I tried speaking to Karen again, called the number she gave me, left a voicemail. No response. Sent an email. Nothing. Then I got a reply from an HOA secretary saying all communications must go through official channels. Whatever the hell that meant. That weekend, a family of 5 set up a full picnic right on my lower patio. One of their kids cracked open a tackle box and started dragging a hook across my freshly stained deck. I told them firmly but not rudely that this was private property and the rules were being ignored. The dad looked up at me like I was the asshole and said, "Isn't this for the community?" That was it. That was the moment. The mental switch flipped and I realized the favors were over. The goodwill was gone. These people didn't see my property as a neighborly courtesy. They saw it as a public park with free entry and no liability. I locked the gates, changed the codes, took down the access permitted sign, put up new ones. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. I knew it would cause a stir, but I didn't expect how fast the retaliation would come, and I sure as hell didn't expect the hellstorm Karen Winslow was about to bring to my door. If I thought locking the gates and posting new signs would be the end of it, I was dead wrong. The following Monday, around 10 in the morning, I stepped out onto my deck with a mug of coffee and saw 2 teenagers scaling the side fence like they were auditioning for American Ninja Warrior. By the time I yelled, they were already halfway to the gazebo, backpacks slung over their shoulders, fishing poles in hand like they'd done it 100 times before. One of them flipped me off as they ran. That afternoon, I reviewed the security footage. Turns out the little punks had been doing this for weeks, sneaking in through a break in the north fence where some shrubs had grown over a weak point. I fixed it myself that evening, hammer in one hand, shotgun across my back, just in case someone decided to get cute. Rural property life, baby. But it wasn't just the kids. By Wednesday, I started getting texts from former cabin guests. One couple from Duluth canceled their July reservation, saying they didn't feel safe after reading what someone had posted about my property online. When I asked what they meant, they sent me a screenshot of a Facebook post from the Lakeview Commons community page. It showed a photo of my patio taken without permission with a caption, "Local landowner bans families from lake access." What happened to being a good neighbor? The comments underneath read like a firing squad. Selfish. Rich loner hoarding nature. Maybe the county should investigate him. Someone named Proud Mom asked if Child Protective Services should get involved because children were crying after being yelled at by a strange man. I laughed at it first, then I stopped laughing. I didn't even have Facebook, but that night I made an account just to see what the hell was going on. I found not one but 3 different groups that had spun up around this mess. The biggest one had nearly 200 members and was run by, you guessed it, Karen Winslow. The cover photo was a stock image of a lake with a bold red stamp that said "Stolen from the community." The group was called Reclaim Lakeview Access. There were dozens of posts, blurry photos of me fixing a fence, claims that I threatened families, stories about how elderly residents used to walk there to feel peace, and how our kids deserve a lake too. I read a post claiming I dumped bleach in the lake to kill fish so people couldn't enjoy it anymore. Another said I installed motion sensors that sprayed pepper spray at children. My favorite was one that said I was illegally running a paramilitary training facility under the guise of a fishing lodge. All complete bullshit. But the problem was, the bullshit was spreading. By Friday, a woman I'd never seen before walked straight up to my gate, shook the lock, and shouted, "Shame on you!" before storming off. Later that day, someone spray-painted the words "communal land" across my mailbox in red. I filed a report with the sheriff's office. They were sympathetic, said they'd make a note of it. But unless I caught someone in the act, there wasn't much they could do. The deputy even chuckled and said, "Sounds like you pissed off the HOA queen." That queen wasn't staying quiet either. I received a hand-delivered letter from the Lakeview Commons HOA, written on thick cardstock like it was a goddamn wedding invitation. It accused me of violating the spirit of shared community values and contributing to an atmosphere of hostility and segregation. They claimed I had reneged on a verbal agreement with residents, and unless I reinstated access, they would take further steps to address the matter. No mention of any legal grounds, just vague threats and sanctimonious passive aggression dressed up in Times New Roman. I had my lawyer, Julia Foster, take a look. She chuckled, said it wasn't enforceable in any court, but warned me to keep everything documented. "This isn't about the law," she said. "It's about pressure, social, political, emotional. Karen wants to make you the villain, and if enough people believe it, she wins, even without a case." I spent the next 2 weeks on the defensive. I added 2 more cameras, reinforced the gates, updated the signage. I even drafted up an official usage policy, had Julia notarize it, and sent a copy to the HOA, just so there would be no confusion. The response? Radio silence. But the posts online doubled in number. Someone even posted my address alongside an invitation to visit the lake and decide for yourself. Like it was Yelp. Then came the worst of it. One Saturday morning, I was giving a tour to a potential client, a local wedding planner who wanted to rent the space for lakeside elopements. As we were walking toward the main patio, we stumbled on a group of HOA residents already there, sitting around the fire pit like they owned the place. They had wine, Bluetooth speakers, and zero shame. I asked them calmly to leave. The woman pouring Chardonnay into a solo cup said, "Oh, Karen said it was fine." I told her Karen didn't own the property. She just smiled and said, "She owns the community." Then added, "Don't be such a grump. You're already the bad guy online, might as well live up to it." The wedding planner left 5 minutes later. No call, no email, just gone. That night, I finally cracked. I sat at my desk with every scrap of correspondence, video footage, and printed out Facebook post and started building a timeline. I created a folder called Karen War Crimes. It wasn't funny, but I had to laugh anyway. Or I'd start throwing things. I wasn't just dealing with bad manners or entitled suburbanites anymore. This was organized, coordinated, targeted, and for the first time since moving here, I realized I wasn't going to win this with patience or politeness. I didn't leave the city just to end up fighting a PR war with a suburban HOA, but here we were. The next move was mine. By midweek, I'd replaced the cheap combination locks on the entry gates with heavy-duty steel deadbolts. I added new signs, more direct, less polite. Private property, no trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted to the fullest extent. I printed them on weatherproof aluminum and screwed them into posts with lag bolts deep enough to survive a tornado. Then I sent a second letter to the HOA. Certified mail, return receipt requested. In it, I stated, politely but firmly, that due to repeated violations of our verbal agreement, access was fully revoked. I reminded them that I was not and never had been a member of Lakeview Commons HOA, nor was my land subject to any of its bylaws. I included plat maps, property boundaries, and a notarized affidavit of ownership, just in case someone over there was pretending not to know. That should have been the end of it. 2 days later, I was sitting on the porch repairing a section of rail when I saw them coming. 3 people walking single file down my gravel driveway, like they were marching to battle. In front was Karen, of course, oversized sunglasses, sharp beige blazer, and a folder tucked under her arm like it contained the nuclear codes. Behind her were 2 other HOA board members, a wiry man named Tom who looked like he hadn't blinked since the Clinton administration, and a woman named Mary Ann who always wore workout gear, despite never appearing even slightly out of breath. Karen didn't wait to be invited. She walked right up to my steps, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Daniel, we need to talk." I stood. "We don't." She smiled. Not the friendly kind, more like the smile you give someone just before stabbing them in the back. "You've created an unfortunate situation," she said. "There's a growing concern in the community that your recent actions are disruptive, hostile, and frankly, beneath the standards of Lakeview living." "Good thing I don't live in Lakeview," I said. She ignored that. "You made an agreement with this community, and now you're reneging on it." "That's not how we do things here." I crossed my arms. "It was a courtesy. One you abused." Tom chimed in, voice tight. "You gave verbal consent for shared access. That creates a pattern of allowance. There's precedent." "Stop," I said. "You're not a lawyer." Karen pulled a sheet from her folder. "Then maybe we'll let a judge decide." I looked at the paper. It wasn't a lawsuit yet. Just a formal notice of community grievance, full of vague accusations like failure to uphold cooperative norms and inhibition of neighborly integration. It was written in the kind of faux legalese that made my skin crawl. And at the bottom, it was signed by all 3 of them. "We'll be holding a general meeting next Thursday," Karen added. "The board will discuss potential actions regarding your non-compliance. You're invited to attend, of course. For now." "For now?" "That could change," she said, her tone cool, "depending on how adversarial you choose to be." They turned and left, like they'd just delivered the 10 Commandments to a heretic. That same night, the email came in from the county zoning board. Apparently, someone had filed a complaint alleging that I was running a commercial enterprise without proper permits, the fishing service, the cabin rentals, the patios. According to the complaint, my entire operation was non-compliant with local land use regulations and potentially in violation of commercial activity ordinances. I knew damn well who filed it. I spent the next morning on the phone with zoning, then code enforcement, then the small business licensing office. All of them said the same thing. We'll be investigating. One even let slip that it wasn't the first complaint from Lakeview Commons in the past month, so they were escalating. I wasn't just the grumpy old guy at the edge of their perfect little HOA anymore. I was the enemy. And Karen, she was leading a crusade. That afternoon, I watched from my kitchen window as a group of residents gathered near the shared path that ran along the back of my property. They stood just beyond the legal boundary, but close enough to make a point. Someone planted a tiny American flag in the dirt, like they were reclaiming land from foreign invaders. One woman held up a handwritten sign that said, "Share the shore." The next morning, a news van pulled up. Local outlet. Karen gave an interview right there in front of the lake. I watched her through binoculars. She waved her arms, gestured toward the water, then pointed up at my property like she was explaining where the evil sorcerer lived. Later, I caught the clip online. She called me a divisive element in an otherwise harmonious community and said that my actions were not just selfish, they're un-American. Un-American. Lady, I grill steaks and pay my taxes. What the hell else do you want? My phone buzzed with texts from friends who saw the news. Some offered support. Others asked what the hell I did to piss off an entire HOA. One of them, a guy I went to college with, just sent me a meme of a flaming dumpster and the words, "Your life right now." That night, I sat down with Julia and laid everything out. The letters, the footage, the zoning complaints, the signs, the video of Karen's little performance on the news. She listened, patient and quiet, then said, "She's not trying to win a legal argument. She's trying to break you before you even get to court." I asked her what to do. She smiled. We fight smarter. I figured the inspection from the zoning board would be a quick box check and gone. After all, everything on my property was up to code. I'd built it myself. Permits filed, blueprints approved, setbacks respected. It wasn't some backwoods shanty village. I used to design luxury homes for a living. But that Monday morning, when two county officials showed up in matching khakis with clipboards and forced smiles, I knew this wasn't going to be routine. They started asking questions. A lot of them. Do you collect cash or credit for your fishing services? How many guests stay per month? Do you serve food or alcohol on premises? Is your jacuzzi considered a public amenity or a private fixture? They weren't looking for answers. They were looking for violations. One of them pointed out that technically, my booking platform wasn't registered with the county's short-term rental registry, even though the paperwork had only just been updated that year. It was a bullshit technicality, but now it was a problem. They made notes, took pictures, promised to follow up soon. By the time they left, I had that same cold, sour feeling I got the first time I watched someone I trusted lie to my face during a contract negotiation. Except this time, the liar wasn't wearing a suit. It was Karen Winslow playing puppet master behind a bureaucratic curtain. Julia and I dug in. We started with county land records, then tax filings, public HOA documents, anything that might give us a clearer picture of what the hell Karen was trying to pull. And that's when the pieces started falling into place. Turns out Karen's husband, Gerald Winslow, wasn't just a semi-retired engineer like the HOA newsletter claimed. He was listed as the regional managing partner for Vista Land Development, a real estate firm based out of Chicago. 3 months ago, Vista Land filed a letter of interest with the county planning office, expressing intent to develop the western lakeshore into a mixed-use recreational corridor. And guess what? My land was the keystone. Literally the only stretch of shoreline not owned by Lakeview Commons or zoned for municipal development. I was the bottleneck, the last uncooperative square on their monopoly board. They weren't just angry neighbors. They were laying groundwork for a takeover. Julia's hands tightened on the documents as she read. "They're using the HOA as a shield," she muttered. "All this community grievance crap. It's cover fire for a land grab." It made sense now. The escalation, the noise, the public shaming, the parade of inspections. Karen wasn't just trying to punish me for closing off access. She was trying to make my life so miserable I'd eventually sell. Cheap, quietly, maybe even under legal duress. The cherry on top? I found a real estate blog post titled Lakeside Expansion Potential for Eco Resorts in Northern MN, written by someone at Vista Land. In the article, it vaguely referenced a pending acquisition that would complete the puzzle. They even used a photo that included my dock, blurred but unmistakable. Karen was planning to sell my land, or at least acting like it was already part of their future project. I didn't know whether to laugh or start flipping tables. That same week, I got hit with another complaint, this time from the Department of Natural Resources. Someone had anonymously reported potential overfishing and unauthorized fish stocking without ecological review. A DNR officer came by, looked around, and politely asked for all my fish records from the last 2 years. Again, guess who had filed the complaint? A little digging turned up the same IP address as Karen's HOA newsletter submissions. The final blow that week came in the form of a thick manila envelope delivered by courier. Inside was a formal legal petition, Lakeview Commons HOA versus Daniel Harper. They were suing me in civil court. The charges weren't about trespassing or property lines. They were far murkier and nastier. According to the suit, I was guilty of contributing to psychological harm and emotional distress within the community, violating communal trust and cohesion, knowingly depriving residents of reasonable environmental access, creating a hostile perimeter designed to intimidate and isolate. It read like a dystopian social manifesto. No mention of law, just community values, emotional hardship, and a dozen citations from HOA codes I wasn't even bound to. It was a kamikaze attempt to drag me into court on the basis of moral failure, not legal violation. Karen wasn't stupid. She knew she couldn't beat me on deeds and titles. But if she could turn me into a public enemy, poison the well, and bleed me through months of litigation, that was a win in her book. I called Julia. She didn't even hesitate. We counter right now. Harassment, defamation, abuse of process. You're not backing down. I didn't want to. But I'll admit, for the first time since this whole circus began, I felt tired, deep down tired, like I was already losing even though nothing had been decided yet. And that's when I realized Karen didn't need to win the case. She just needed to make it hurt enough that I'd walk away. By the time the lawsuit was officially filed, I was already losing business. 2 families canceled their reservations, citing safety concerns. One woman emailed me a link to a Reddit thread titled "Beware the Lakeview Psycho." It featured a blurry photo of me welding a patio railing, labeled militia activity, with 100 comments underneath debating whether I was a survivalist, a tax protester, or just an unhinged loner with booby traps and bear traps on his lawn. I didn't even have Reddit, but Karen and her minions sure did. I'd underestimated her before, but now I understood what she was. A 21st century witch hunter with a Wi-Fi connection. This wasn't about facts or law anymore. It was about narrative, about control, about turning me into a symbol, an effigy she could burn on the digital altar of community integrity. She stepped it up. Anonymous Yelp reviews started appearing on my business listing, even though I didn't have one until she created it. Disgusting man. Verbally abused our children and threatened to shoot our dog. A racist recluse who screams at anyone near the water. Avoid. This place is a trap. One review claimed I poisoned fish with antifreeze. Another said I used my hot tub as a nude pagan meditation site. There were tweets, TikToks. Local Facebook groups suddenly had pinned posts about a troubling landowner in the Lakeview area. One particularly unhinged video featured a sobbing woman claiming I had traumatized her toddler by refusing to let him pet my dog. Never mind that I don't even own a dog. At first, I tried reporting it, but the platforms were slow, unhelpful, and often anonymous trolls just reposted the content faster than it could be taken down. One account posted a meme of me edited into a Soviet propaganda poster under the text, "Hoarding the lake, hoarding freedom." I'm not sure who designed it, but honestly, decent graphic work. I decided it was time to fight fire with strategy. I called up a guy named Leon, former client, tech genius, and the kind of person who smiled at the phrase IP address trace. I sent him everything I had, screenshots, posts, fake reviews, suspicious emails, and the metadata from a few PDF files that somehow found their way into my inbox with friendly advice. about how to avoid lawsuits. Leon didn't even flinch. "Give me 3 days." In the meantime, Julia and I drafted a cease and desist targeting the HOA as an organization and Karen personally. It cited defamation, cyber harassment, and tortious interference with business relations. She hand-delivered it to the HOA office, well, technically the converted garage of their treasurer's house, and said Karen's eyes twitched when she saw it. Then Leon called back. He'd found the mother lode. Most of the anonymous posts were tied back to 3 IP addresses, all originating from the same residential router, registered to Karen Winslow's home internet service. A few more were routed through a VPN, but he flagged several identical typing patterns and image metadata signatures. She wasn't even careful. One file still had her name in the export metadata, Karen W. Community Values Final, sloppy. We compiled a report, 17 pages long, with timestamps, network traces, visual matches, and side-by-side screenshots. We included a timeline of the harassment that matched up with HOA meetings and statements made by Karen in public forums. Julia handed it to a friend of hers at the sheriff's office. Not an official report yet, but enough to raise eyebrows. The next day, an officer just happened to swing by Lakeview Commons during a neighborhood gathering, asking casual questions about social media and group administration. Karen didn't like that. That night, the Reclaim Lakeview Access Facebook group vanished, deleted. Poof. Her personal page disappeared the next day. Yelp took down the fake reviews after Leon submitted the IP matches, and Twitter suspended 3 accounts linked to harassment activity. It wasn't a full victory. The lawsuit was still looming. The community still buzzed with gossip. But the online war, we'd just struck a hell of a blow. And then came the knock at the door. It was a guy in his early 50s, neatly dressed, slightly balding, nervous smile. He introduced himself as Douglas Harper, no relation, and said he'd been on the HOA board until 2 weeks ago. "I had to quit," he said, shifting on his feet. "I couldn't do it anymore. I didn't sign up to be part of a takedown operation." He sat at my kitchen table, wringing his hands like he was about to confess to war crimes. "She's not doing this for the community," he said. "She's doing it for control and for her husband's development deal. They're trying to push you out. The lawsuit is just phase 1. He handed me a flash drive, meeting recordings, internal emails. Some of it's ugly. I figured, you should know what they're really doing. He left before I could thank him. Later that night, I opened the files. Audio from a board meeting 2 months ago. Karen's voice, clear as day. "He'll cave eventually. Everyone caves when the pressure's high enough. The man lives alone. He won't last." She was wrong. But she wasn't going to stop either. After Douglas left, I stayed up half the night listening to those board meeting recordings. I heard things I can't unhear. Karen wasn't just manipulative. She was calculated, rehearsed. In one recording, she walked the board through scenarios in which I might be legally or socially pressured into relocating. In another, she laid out projection maps for a community expansion plan that literally had my land penciled in as Phase 3, shoreline integration. I was a phase now. They spoke about my property like it was already theirs, a resource, an obstacle, a pawn on the table. At one point, a voice, probably Mary Ann, asked, "What if he refuses to sell?" And Karen laughed. Not a nervous laugh, but the kind you hear from someone who already knows the outcome. Then we apply enough pressure that the board can vote on eminent domain intervention, or we get the developers to move forward without him. Either way, the perception will be that he held back progress. Let the court of public opinion do the rest. I knew eminent domain wasn't an option, they weren't the government, and my land wasn't for public use. But perception, that was her real weapon. And it wasn't long before the next strike hit. A week later, Julia called, her voice sharper than usual. "Did you sign anything recently?" I blinked. "No." "Why?" "Because I just received notice from the county clerk that a preliminary land transfer document was submitted. For your parcel." My mouth went dry. "Excuse me." She forwarded the email. There it was, a scanned copy of a form titled Intent to Sell, Private Transfer for Development Partnership. The document claimed I'd agreed to sell my land to Lakeview Commons Redevelopment Committee, whatever the hell that was, for a sum of $425,000. It had my name typed under the seller field and a signature that looked vaguely like mine. But it wasn't. I stared at it for a long time. Julia was already 2 steps ahead. She'd pulled the full document record and traced the submission source, a Vistaland intern working with Karen's husband's division. The document had been backdated by 10 days and quietly slipped into the county system during a batch filing of several unrelated land sales. A stealth move, probably hoping I'd be too buried in legal drama to notice. This wasn't just pressure anymore. This was fraud. We immediately contacted the county recorder's office, filed a dispute of authenticity, and flagged the file as fraudulent. Within 48 hours, an internal investigation was launched. That same evening, I received an email from someone inside Vistaland. A whistleblower, no name, just a burner account, truth shored. The message read, "Check their presentation to investors. You're already listed as an acquired holdout parcel, slide 14. I found it." Right there, sandwiched between drone shots of pristine shoreline and marketing buzzwords about community expansion, was a small bullet point that said, "Private acquisition finalized. Harper parcel, development pending regulatory clearance." They were selling me before they bought me. Julia nearly put her fist through her laptop when she saw it. "We're not just going to court," she said. "We're going nuclear." She filed a motion for injunctive relief, demanding that all actions related to the fake land transfer be frozen pending investigation. She also contacted the state attorney general's office to report attempted fraudulent conveyance, a felony in Minnesota. Meanwhile, I took the offensive. I reached out to local journalists, ones who still cared about facts. One of them, a woman named Camilla from the Duluth Sentinel, agreed to come interview me on site. I showed her the land, the cabins, the signage, the documents, the timeline, and I handed her the recordings of the HOA meetings, with one clip queued up perfectly, Karen's voice crisp and smug. "Once we get the perception locked in, no one will care if it's legal." Camilla's eyes widened. "You mind if I use that?" "I'm begging you to." Within 72 hours, her article dropped. HOA or hostile takeover, one man's fight against suburban empire building. It went semi-viral, at least in Minnesota circles. The comment sections were a battlefield. Some still called me stubborn, selfish, paranoid, but many others started asking the right question. Why does a real estate developer need to fake a land sale from a private citizen? The pressure shifted. Suddenly, Karen wasn't the noble neighborhood president fighting a recluse. She was the developer's wife playing HOA overlord, forging documents to secure shoreline rights she had no claim to. She didn't show her face at the HOA mailbox station for days, but I knew she wasn't gone. Karen was the kind of enemy who doesn't quit. She regroups, she reloads, and judging by the silence, she was already planning her next move. The court date came faster than I expected. I walked into the county courthouse wearing the one good suit I still owned, navy, tailored, no tie. I didn't want to look like I was playing politician. I wanted to look like what I was, a man forced to stand up and defend what already belonged to him. The courtroom was packed. HOA members, local press, a few nosy neighbors pretending to be curious tourists. Karen sat on the opposite side, calm and collected, in a cream-colored suit with a scarf that looked like it cost more than my truck. Her attorney, some polished bastard from a Minneapolis firm, looked like he'd been hired to smile smugly, no matter how bad things got. The judge, an older woman with steel gray hair and a stare that could cut drywall, wasted no time. Karen's side opened with what they called a community impact assessment. It was a slideshow of sunny pictures, kids playing by the lake, elderly couples on lawn chairs, a dad fishing with his son. Then came a sudden turn. Photos of my no trespassing signs, cherry-picked security footage, and one particularly grainy video where I yelled at a group of intruders after they tried to light fireworks near the propane grill. Hostile, the lawyer said. Unneighborly. Dangerous. Julia didn't blink. When it was our turn, she walked up calmly, greeted the judge, and requested to enter Exhibit A, 17 pages of IP trace reports. Then Exhibit B, whistleblower emails. Exhibit C, the fake land transfer with my forged signature. And finally, Exhibit D, a USB drive with the audio files from the HOA meetings. When the judge asked what she'd hear on those recordings, Julia simply said, the quiet part out loud. We played the clip. Karen's voice, crisp and unmistakable. He'll cave eventually. Everyone caves when the pressure's high enough. The man lives alone. He won't last. There was a shift in the room. A subtle silence, the kind that settles when everyone realizes the story they thought they knew just broke open. Karen's lawyer objected, of course, claimed it was taken out of context, that it was expressive rhetoric and boardroom theorizing. The judge let him ramble, then asked, "Do you dispute that this is your client's voice?" He hesitated. "No." Julia didn't stop there. She called Douglas to the stand. He testified calmly, clearly, and under oath. Talked about internal emails, manipulation of meeting records, how votes were orchestrated. She led us to believe we were doing the right thing. But it wasn't about access. It was about acquisition. It was always about the land. Then came Leon, the tech guy. He explained the social media attacks, the sock puppet accounts, the metadata trails, and the patterns of coordinated smear campaigns. And then Julia called me. I stood in front of the room and told the truth. Not just the facts, but the weight of it all, the exhaustion, the harassment, the fear that everything I'd built could be dismantled by one power-hungry suburban tyrant who mistook my silence for surrender. I could feel eyes on me from every corner of the room. Karen wouldn't look up. The judge called for recess. When we returned, things had shifted. The courtroom was tense, like a live wire humming in the floorboards. The judge's expression had gone from neutral to surgical. She addressed both sides. This case is not just about property. It is about boundaries, legal, personal, and ethical. One party has clearly overstepped all three. Then she turned to Karen and her lawyer. "I will not tolerate weaponized bureaucracy masquerading as community stewardship." Karen's face cracked then, just a little. The corners of her mouth twitched, the mask slipping. Her lawyer whispered something, and she gave a small nod. But she knew. Everyone knew. The court ruled in our favor. Karen's motion for forced access and community easement was denied. The fraudulent land transfer was officially nullified and entered into record as an attempted conveyance without consent, pending separate investigation. A preliminary injunction was granted, forbidding the HOA from engaging in any further contact with my property or business. And then came the kicker. The judge referred Karen's actions for criminal review, including fraud, defamation, and attempted unlawful transfer of private land. The room didn't gasp, but it didn't have to. The air changed. That kind of silence says more than any outburst ever could. I walked out of that courtroom with Julia beside me, papers in hand, jaw clenched. But it wasn't over yet. I still had to deal with the community she poisoned, the damage she caused, the way my name had been dragged through digital hell for months. I still had a story to finish. It took another 3 months for the dust to settle. The fraud investigation against Karen was still ongoing, and while I didn't have front row seats to the proceedings, I got regular updates from Julia. County investigators seized HOA meeting records, subpoenaed email logs, and even interviewed other board members. A few of them cracked almost immediately. Turns out loyalty evaporates fast when you're looking at real charges. Karen resigned before she was forced out. No press release, no statement. One day she was there, and the next, her nameplate was gone from the HOA bulletin board. I heard through the grapevine she and her husband put their house on the market, quietly. Rumor had it Vistaland cut ties with Gerald to mitigate reputational risk. Nothing official, but I won't pretend I didn't enjoy hearing it. The HOA itself didn't collapse, but it limped. After the courtroom fiasco, a good chunk of the community stopped showing up to meetings altogether. Others started asking real questions about what their dues were funding and how decisions were actually being made. For once, the board had to answer. And me? Well, I kept doing what I'd always done. Only now, my boundaries were respected. The gates stayed locked, the signs stayed up. But I noticed something curious. Some of the neighbors started waving again. A few even apologized, awkwardly, in that Midwest way where they pretend to talk about the weather, but slip in a quick, "sorry about the whole thing," before walking away. I didn't forgive easily, but I wasn't interested in staying angry forever either. The cabins booked up fast that season. I even had a few returning guests who'd followed the story in the local news and came just to support the guy who stood up to the HOA mafia. One couple brought a bottle of bourbon and a thank you note. Another left behind a guestbook entry that read, "Finally, peace has a price, and you paid it for us." But not everything was easy. There were still comments online, still snide looks from a few of Karen's old inner circle, still whispers about how I'd overreacted or embarrassed the community. Some wounds take time, some don't heal at all. I accepted that. Then, one evening in early fall, I got a letter, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a folded HOA meeting agenda, dated 2 months ahead. At the bottom, in a shaky pen, someone had written, "We're voting on dissolving the association, quietly. Some of us think you were right all along." No name, no signature. I laughed when I read it. A long, dry, tired laugh. Then I poured myself a drink and walked down to the patio, the same one Karen once called Stolen Shoreline. The lake was glass smooth, golden, still. I sat in one of the Adirondack chairs and looked out across the water, thinking about the fight it took to sit here in peace, about how damn close I came to giving up, about how power doesn't always look like money or lawyers. Sometimes it just wears a polite smile and calls itself community. But this land, these trees, these stones, this stretch of honest, hard-earned space, it was mine. Still is.